Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. This helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. I hate being a park ranger. I hate even thinking about how excited I once was for this job. How I pictured myself learning real skills, working mornings, getting trained on tractors and tools, feeling like I finally stepped into a long-term career. I graduated college in December 2024, walked across the stage thinking I was stepping into the first chapter of my adult life. When I got hired at the state park only a month later, I thought luck was finally on my side. I remember how proud I felt telling my family. I remember the relief of not being unemployed. I remember actually looking forward to clocking in. But everything they promised me was a lie. My position is seasonal. They said that up front, but they also promised mornings and training and real experience. Instead, they threw me straight into closing shifts, night after night. The kind of shifts no one else wants, because everyone knows what closing really means. Bathrooms, trash overflowing bins. People who use the park like it's a dump and leave without flushing or cleaning, or doing anything close to decent. I keep gloves in my pocket, and I still don't feel clean by the time I get home. Sometimes I scrub my hands so hard they crack around the knuckles. I leave the park around 9:30 or 10 p.m. most nights. Sometimes later, depending on how bad the bathrooms were. There's something claustrophobic about stepping out of the ranger office into a black parking lot. The trees so thick you can't see past the first few trunks. The forest is alive at night, but not in the peaceful way people romanticize. It breathes, it shifts, it watches. Maybe it's just the way the wind moves through the branches, or the way the critters rustle low to the ground. But it feels like something paying attention that shouldn't be. The pay is awful. $15 an hour. $2 above minimum wage. No benefits because I'm seasonal. No set schedule, no stability, nothing. Just the hope that if I keep showing up and cleaning shit, covered toilets long enough, someone might eventually give me a chance to touch a chainsaw or drive a tractor. But months have gone by, and no one has taught me anything. It's like my name is stuck on the cleaning roster permanently. Some nights feel heavier than others. It's hard to explain unless you've been in a park at night alone. The darkness makes everything bigger. Every path looks different. Trails I walk every day feel like tunnels leading to the wrong place when the sun goes down. On my third week, I was closing up the West Bathhouse, dragging a trash bag almost as tall as me toward the dumpster behind the maintenance shed. The motion light on the shed kept flickering, buzzing like a dying insect. I remember standing there with the trash bag, staring at the shadow behind the building. It looked like someone standing still. I waited for the light to stop flickering so I could see clearly, but it kept going in and out, until the shadow seemed to pulse with it. When the light finally held steady, there was nothing there. Just the shed and the gravel and the tree line. I told myself it was just my eyes adjusting, just work exhaustion. Just another long closing shift. I wish that was the last time I felt watched. Sometimes when I'm locking bathroom doors for the night, I hear footsteps on the gravel path behind me. Not animal steps. Human ones. Slow, careful, like someone matching their pace to mine. I turn around and there's nobody. Just the dark. I tell myself it's my own boots echoing off the concrete walls. But echoes don't follow you that slowly. Echoes don't stop when you stop. One night I found the north restroom already unlocked even though I swear I had locked it earlier. I knew I had. I double-checked it like I always do. But when I pulled the door open again, the lights inside were off. I stood there with a knot tightening in my chest, listening for anyone inside. There wasn't a sound. I flipped the light switch, and the fluorescent bulbs buzzed to life one by one. Nothing was touched. Nothing looked disturbed. But the air in there felt wrong, like it hadn't been empty a second earlier. I don't know if fear builds slowly when you're in a job like this, or if it hits all at once, but lately it feels like every night something inside the park presses against me. Not a creature or a ghost or anything supernatural, just a pressure. A reminder that I am alone in acres of woods with nothing to protect me except a walkie that barely works after dusk. The worst part is how trapped I feel. I took this job because I thought it meant stability and growth in a future. I thought being a park ranger meant learning real skills, not scrubbing human waste off floors while listening to raccoons knock over trash cans outside. I thought it meant being part of something. I didn't expect to end every night sweating under harsh bathroom lights, wondering why I studied so hard in college, only to end up doing something I could have done without a diploma. But nights like last night make something clear in a way I can't ignore anymore. Last night I stood by the locked gate waiting for the clock to hit closing time, the trees creaking in the wind, the path behind me shifting with footsteps I pretended not to hear. And standing there, feeling the weight of everything I've carried since December, something finally settled in my chest. I don't have to stay. I don't have to pretend this is normal or acceptable, or the start of a stable career. I don't have to keep walking through dark trails alone, waiting for my nerves to snap. I can leave before this place drains the rest of me. I can find a job that respects my time, my work, and my goals. Something that doesn't twist my stomach every time I check my schedule. This job taught me something, even if it wasn't the skills I was promised. It taught me what I don't want my life to look like. It taught me I deserve better than fear, exhaustion, and disappointment. So I'm done pretending this is fine. I'm quitting. And for once, the thought doesn't scare me. It feels like the first honest breath I've taken since I started. I spent most of my career in natural resources as a seasonal, bouncing from one state park to another, doing whatever needed to be done. Every park had its own rhythm, its own routines, its own quiet problems that didn't show up in the brochures. When I finally got into management years later, I thought I'd left the hardest parts behind. But there's one stretch of time I still think about more than any other. It was during my first season at a remote state park in the northern part of the state, a place people mostly forgot existed unless they were fishermen or deer hunters. I went there to get experience, to build the skills everyone said I needed. I didn't expect anything unusual. I was wrong. Since it was my first season, I was at the very bottom. The pay wasn't great, there were no benefits, and I knew I'd have to find something else to do once winter hit. The manager tried to sell the job as an opportunity, and in a way it was, but the truth was simple. I was the one who cleaned the bathrooms, hauled gravel, painted picnic tables, cleared fallen branches from trails, checked fire pits, and did whatever the full-timers didn't want to do. I didn't mind most of it. I knew I had to do my time, like everyone kept saying. But the work wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was how strange the park felt once you spent enough time alone in it. The place was huge, thick forest, long marshes, quiet lakes, old service roads that hadn't been touched in years. When visitors came through, everything felt normal enough. But after hours, once the day visitors left and the campground got quiet, the woods felt heavy. Not haunted or mystical or anything dramatic, just heavy in a way that made my instincts sharpen without me wanting them to. I kept telling myself it was because the place was remote, and I wasn't used to being the only one patrolling miles of trail in the evenings. My duties changed depending on staffing, but that summer we were short. That meant I was often sent out alone to check the back trails before closing. There was one trail in particular that I hated. It wasn't even that long, maybe a mile and a half, but it ran along an old service corridor lined with rusting culverts and collapsed fencing, remnants of logging operations from decades earlier. Nobody hiked it. It wasn't on the map. The only reason we monitored it was because, a few years back, Someone found an illegal campsite out there. Management wanted it checked every night. One evening in mid-July, around dusk, I hiked out to the start of that old trail. The air was thick and humid, and the only sound was the buzz of insects. I remember thinking how odd it was that I had never once passed another person on that trail. Even wildlife seemed to avoid it. There were no deer tracks, no fresh scat, no signs of anything moving through. Just silence. The first half of the walk was uneventful. I scanned for signs of new campsites, looked for fresh disturbance in the leaves, checked the ground for glass or fire remnants. Nothing. I tried to stay focused on the job, but the farther I walked, the more I felt like someone had been there recently. There was no evidence, nothing to justify the thought, but the feeling sat on me anyway. About 3/4 of the way in, I noticed something off. A section of the ground looked compressed, like someone had knelt there or dropped something heavy. It wasn't enough to report, but it made me stop. I crouched down and touched the soil. It was warm, not from the sun, but like it had been disturbed recently. I stood up and looked around, trying to see if I'd missed anything. The woods were too still. Even the insects seemed quieter. I kept walking, telling myself I was overthinking. I wasn't new to nature, but I was new to being responsible for an entire park's safety. That pressure can play tricks on you, especially when you're young and trying to prove yourself. But when I reached the end of the maintenance corridor, the part where the old trail looped back toward the river, I froze. Someone had peeled bark off one of the trees. Long, messy strips. It was fresh. The inside was pale and wet. What bothered me wasn't the peeling itself. People peeled bark sometimes. What bothered me was that the strips were arranged on the ground beneath the tree in a perfect semicircle. Not artfully placed, not neat, but deliberate, like someone had sat there and organized them for a reason only they understood. I felt a tightness in my stomach. This wasn't kids messing around. No one hiked back there, and there were no boot prints, no tire tracks. Whoever did it had walked in the same way I did. On foot. Quiet. Careful. I didn't report it that night. I should have, but I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal had done it, even though I knew that wasn't true. Maybe another employee had come out earlier. I forced myself to believe that. For the next week, small things kept happening on that trail. A broken branch that looked placed, not fallen. A patch of ground swept clear of leaves. The feeling of being watched that wouldn't go away. I never saw anyone, never heard footsteps, never caught movement in the trees. But every evening, something new was there. Always subtle, always intentional. The worst night was late July. I went out just before closing, the sky already dim. The air felt wrong the moment I walked in. Cooler. Like the temperature had dropped only there. I checked the first half of the trail fast, trying to ignore the pressure building in my chest. When I reached the spot where the bark semicircle had been, I stopped so hard my boots scraped the dirt. The bark was gone. In its place, right in the center of the clearing, was a single, folded park map. It was one of ours, one from the visitor center. Clean. New. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it, trying to understand the message. Someone had gone to the visitor center, taken a map, hiked all the way out here, and left it where only staff would find it. The idea that someone was moving quietly through the park, staying unnoticed, maybe watching us, made my skin crawl. There was nothing supernatural about any of it. That was what made it so much worse. This was human, calculated, patient. I backed away slowly. The woods were silent again. But this time the silence felt loaded, like someone was waiting for my reaction. I didn't give them one. I left the trail and walked back to the truck without looking behind me. I locked the doors, even though I felt ridiculous doing it, and drove straight to the office. That night I finally reported everything. Every detail I had been brushing off. Management took it seriously. They contacted law enforcement. They increased patrols. For the rest of the season, nobody sent me on that trail alone. Eventually fall came, and with it the end of my contract. I left the park and moved to a different seasonal position in another state. I never learned who was out there. No one was ever caught. No campsites discovered. No missing persons connected to the incident. The map disappeared before the officers arrived, even though I had left it untouched. Years later, when I eventually became a park manager myself, I understood something important. Natural resources jobs aren't just about nature. They're about people. The good ones and the ones who make the hair on your neck rise for reasons you can't fully explain. The strange things you find, the subtle signs, the quiet reminders that the wild isn't always the most dangerous part of your job. That summer taught me more than any training manual ever did. And the ending is simple and clear. Nothing followed me home, nothing supernatural happened, nothing chased me. But someone was out there in those woods, moving in silence, watching the park the same way I was. And the fact that they never revealed themselves, never made a mistake, and never returned once patrols increased, that's what stays with me. Because people like that don't just disappear, they move on to somewhere else. I remember the weeks right after I finished school. I thought getting hired as a ranger would feel exciting, like stepping into a new life. But most days started with me unlocking cold bathrooms before sunrise, wiping down mirrors, flushing toilets left by people who didn't care who cleaned after them. Everyone told me to stick with it, that every ranger starts at the bottom, that if I did the shit jobs without complaining I'd stand out. They said this was how you earn trust, how you move from state work to federal, how you carve a path toward better pay, better stations, better parks. I tried to hold on to that thought every morning. I tried to picture some future version of myself in a different uniform, somewhere far from my small hometown park. The park I worked in wasn't big. A few hiking trails, a forest thick enough to block most of the morning sun, a lake that collected fog until almost noon. Most visitors came only on weekends. On weekdays it felt like I was the only one in there, like I was watching over a place that wasn't fully awake. My shift started at 6. I drove the white state truck down the access road, past the old ranger cabin that no one used anymore, and parked near the trailhead. Every morning I would sit inside the truck for a minute before stepping out, letting the heater run and telling myself this job could lead to something better if I kept showing up. One morning in late October, I got there before any light touched the trees. I remember it was colder than usual. The kind of cold that makes your breath hang for a long time. I stepped out with my cleaning kit and felt that thick quiet the park gets before dawn. Not peaceful silence, just a heavy kind that makes you slow down without knowing why. I walked toward the bathrooms first. I always did those before anything else. I unlocked the men's door and stepped inside. The concrete floor still held the night's chill. I was halfway through wiping the sinks when I noticed something strange. The smell. It wasn't the usual chemical cleaner, mixed with whatever visitors had left behind the day before. It was something metallic, sharp enough to sting my nose. At first I thought maybe something in the pipes had corroded. I checked the sinks, the drains. Nothing. But the smell stayed and seemed to get stronger as I moved closer to the far stall. The door of that stall was slightly open. I nudged it farther, expecting to see trash someone had stuffed inside. Instead I saw deep scrape marks on the floor. Fresh ones. The kind that cut into the paint. They started near the back wall and dragged outward toward the stall door, like someone had pulled something heavy across the concrete. The metal divider had a dent at the bottom corner. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the scrape. It felt like something sharp had been pressed into the floor with real force. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the lines. My breath felt louder in that small space. I kept telling myself it was probably some teenager messing around. Kids like doing stupid things in quiet places. But the marks looked too deep for that. I backed out of the stall and finished the rest of the cleaning fast. When I stepped outside again, I felt the air hit my face like I had just left a basement instead of a bathroom. After that, I headed down to the lakeside trail. My job that morning was to check the fog line and make sure no fallen branches blocked the path. The forest felt wrong as soon as I entered it. I'd been in that park almost every day for months, but that morning the trees seemed to hold more sound than usual. Or maybe they held none at all. I couldn't decide which was worse. I walked slower than I normally did, scanning the ground for loose branches. I was about 10 minutes in when I found the second thing. A single boot sat in the middle of the path. Not muddy, not worn down, not torn, just sitting straight up like someone had stepped out of it and forgotten to step back in. I stopped. I looked around. No footprints in the dirt. No drag marks. No sign that anyone had walked through at all. I bent down and touched the boot. It was warm. I felt a tight pressure crawl up my spine. I stood straight again and looked deeper into the trees. The fog was still thick near the lake, but the trail should have been clear enough to see any movement. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I backed away and left the boot where I found it. I wasn't supposed to leave things like that unreported, but something about standing there made me feel like I needed to keep moving. When I reached the lake, the fog sat on the water like a solid sheet. I checked the usual points, the benches, the trash bins. Everything looked normal until I turned around to walk back. The hair on my arms rose even before I understood why. There were wet footprints on the trail behind me. Bare footprints. Each one deep enough to show the full shape of a heel, arch, and toes. They led from the water toward the path I had just walked down. I knelt and touched one. The dirt around it was still settling, like the print was seconds old. I followed the line of prints with my eyes. They stopped about 20 feet from me. Stopped completely. No fading, no turning, no signs of someone stepping off into the bushes. Just a final print in the middle of the trail and nothing after it. For a long moment I didn't move. My breath shook even though I tried to steady it. I didn't feel watched exactly. It was something else. Like the forest was holding its breath too, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stood up slowly and walked back toward the truck without stopping. I didn't run. I didn't want to. Running felt like the kind of thing that would make whatever was behind those prints pay attention to me. I reached the parking area with my hands shaking and didn't realize how tight I was gripping the keys until I dropped them trying to unlock the door. When I finally sat in the truck, the heater blowing warm air at my face, I stared at my own reflection in the windshield. I didn't know what I had seen or what had been there before I arrived. But it was real. The scrape marks in the bathroom, the warm boot, the footprints that came from nowhere and ended in the middle of the trail. None of it was imagination. None of it was a story I could tell myself to get through the early mornings. It taught me something I didn't expect to learn this early in my career. This job is not just about dealing with people or trash or long shifts. Sometimes it's about the things you can't explain. The things that live quietly in the corners of the world where most people never look. You may think you understand a place because you work in it, because you walk the same trails every day. But the land keeps its own secrets. And if you stay long enough, you will see them whether you're ready or not. I still go back every morning. I still do the small jobs without complaining, because I know they matter. But now I pay attention to every sound and every mark, even the ones that seem harmless. This park gave me my first real lesson about the work I want to do for the rest of my life. And I learned it clearly even in the most ordinary places. Something can be standing just out of sight, leaving only the traces it wants you to find. I used to repeat the same advice in my head every morning as I walked into the park station. Stick with it. Everyone starts somewhere. Cleaning bathrooms is part of rangering. Show you can do the hard jobs and people notice. I tried to believe it, tried to hold on to the idea that this work would lead to something better. A state job could open the door to federal work one day. Better pay, better paths. I told myself all of this like a prayer, especially on mornings when the cold air smelled like mold and old pine needles, and I knew what waited for me. That fall, the park was nearly empty most days. Only a few hikers came through, mostly older folks trying to catch the last of the color before winter. The quiet should have made the job easy, but somehow it made everything worse. When the trees stop moving and the trails go silent, the small noises stand out more. A branch snapping somewhere far off. Gravel shifting where no one should be walking. The sound of something dragging through dry leaves. Little things that you can't justify but feel anyway. I didn't mention any of it to my supervisor. I didn't want to look jumpy, or worse, weak. They already trusted me with the closing rounds, the longest and loneliest part of the day. If I did them well, maybe I'd get better assignments later. That's what I kept telling myself the day everything changed. It was late October, the sun already slipping low by the time I started the last sweep. The air felt wrong from the beginning. Not cold, just heavy, like it was pressing down on my shoulders. I checked the eastern trail first, the one that looped around the marsh. It was always muddy this time of year, but now the ground looked churned up, like someone had been pacing back and forth for hours. Deep footprints, maybe boots, but the spacing didn't look natural. Too close in some places, too far apart in others. It made my skin tighten, but I pushed the feeling down and kept walking. At the far edge of the loop, there was a small maintenance shed we rarely used. I always checked it anyway. Procedure. The door was supposed to stay locked, but when I turned the handle it clicked open without any resistance. Inside, the air smelled like wet metal and something sour. The light from my flashlight hit the floor first, then the shelves, then something else. Fresh scrape marks on the concrete. Deep ones, like someone had dragged heavy equipment across it. But we hadn't used that shed in weeks. I backed out, closed the door, locked it, and wrote a note to tell maintenance later. That was all I could do. I didn't have the authority to investigate anything beyond that. I moved on to the old picnic area. No one used it anymore because the tables were rotting, and there were too many fallen branches to clear easily. By then the sun was gone. The sky was a dark blue fading to black, and the temperature had dropped fast enough that my breath came out thick and white. I shined my light between the trees, just doing my job, just checking for campers or kids messing around. Nothing. But as I turned to leave, I heard it, something breathing. Slow, steady, not mine. I froze and waited for the sound to come again. It didn't. When I finally convinced myself it was only my own pulse making my ears ring, I kept moving. The last stop was the upper restrooms. Every ranger hated these. They were old concrete buildings from the 70s, colder inside than the air outside, always smelling like cleaner and mildew, no matter how many times you scrubbed them. I unlocked the men's side first and stepped in. Something was off immediately. The echo wasn't right. Usually, when you walk into that place, your steps bounce off the walls. But this time the sound felt swallowed, like the room was full even though it was empty. My flashlight flickered for the first time that night. I shook it a little until the beam steadied. The first stall door was half open. I pushed it with my boot. Empty. The second was closed. When I tried it, it opened too easily, like someone had just let it go. Nothing inside. The third stall was the one that made me stop moving. The door was closed, but there was a line of dirt on the floor leading under it. Not just dirt. Mud, leaves, small bits of gravel. Like someone had walked through the woods and tracked half the trail inside. I don't know why, but the sight of it made my throat tighten. No one should have been in there. Not that deep in the park. Not that late. And not without me seeing them on the way in. I pushed the stall door open with my foot slower this time. The hinge squealed. At first it looked empty. Then I noticed the wall. Long smears where someone had pressed their hands against it as if steadying themselves, or trying to stay upright. The smears were muddy, not bloody, not dramatic. just ordinary mud, but the pattern looked desperate, like the person had been shaking. I stepped back without realizing it, my whole body tense. I kept imagining someone still in the park, watching me, hidden in the dark trees outside. I did a final sweep as fast as I could without breaking protocol. Every sound made me jerk my light toward the trees. The wind had picked up, and the rustling leaves sounded like footsteps pacing along the trail. By the time I locked the last gate, my hands were shaking bad enough that I dropped the keys twice. When I finally made it back to the station, the weight in my chest didn't lift. I sat in the truck for a long time before starting it. I wasn't scared of ghosts or creatures. I wasn't even scared of the dark. What scared me was the feeling that someone had been out there that whole time, close enough to leave prints and drag marks and stall smears, but patient enough not to be seen. Someone who knew the woods well, maybe better than me. I turned in the incident notes the next morning. Maintenance checked the shed. Law enforcement walked the trails. No signs of anyone, no new prints, nothing disturbed. They told me it was probably old marks I hadn't noticed before. Maybe they were right. Maybe I'd just been tired, stretched thin from long shifts and trying too hard to prove myself. But the next day, when I walked those same trails in broad daylight, everything looked normal again, too normal. Like the park had swallowed whatever I saw, whatever I heard, whatever I felt. Like it had never happened. I'm still here, still rangering, still doing the work. I haven't quit. The advice I repeated still matters to me. But now, every time the sun goes down and the trails go quiet, I feel that same weight settle on me again. A reminder that the world doesn't need ghosts to be frightening. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones that leave no trace at all, except in the way your instincts sharpen and your nerves stay tight long after you're home. And now, when I walk the closing rounds, I don't tell myself that I'm imagining things. I tell myself that being alert is part of the job, just like the bathrooms, just like the trails. I tell myself that noticing the things other people ignore is exactly what keeps me safe. And I pay attention, because whatever was out there that night didn't need to show itself to remind me it was real. I used to think the woods were the one place in my life that could never turn on me. After more than a decade working federal, NPS, BLM, Forest Service, I'd built my whole identity out of trail dust, fire lines, and late-night SARE callouts. I had a promotion lined up that would have put me in my dream district, the kind of place you commit your bones to. Then everything collapsed in a way that didn't feel real at first. Office politics, budget cuts, some reshuffling higher up. All I know is the offer was rescinded so fast it barely left a paper trail. 1 week I was preparing to move into the next step of my life. The next week I was unemployed. I spent a month pacing the walls of my place, like it was a temporary shelter after a fire. My gear sat packed in a corner, because I couldn't bring myself to unpack it. When state parks called, offering a low-level job, I told myself it would be temporary, maybe even refreshing. Something to keep me close to the land. Something simple. But the simplicity was a lie. I realized that on day one, when my supervisor handed me a mop instead of a radio. Now most of my days are spent alone, moving from one empty building to another before the gates open, cleaning bathrooms that smell like chemicals and mold, picking up trash, fixing the same broken latch on the same warped door, because the budget won't allow for a replacement. Nobody talks. Everyone walks around tense, waiting for some new budget cut or policy change. Even the forest feels different. Understaffed trails go untouched for so long that entire sections vanish under brush. The quiet here isn't peace, it's exhaustion settling into the soil. The first strange thing I noticed wasn't anything supernatural. It was a pattern. Every morning, the maintenance log listed the same bathroom near the far edge of the park as cleaned. Except it wasn't me, and nobody else admitted to doing it. The place is isolated, surrounded by old ponderosas and a thinning patch of grass. so I assumed someone was signing it off to save time. One morning I went out early to actually clean it and found the door propped open. Inside, the air was cold, colder than outside even though it was already pushing into the hot part of summer. The floor was spotless. The mirrors had no streaks. Even the little trash bin had a fresh liner. That part should have been normal, but it wasn't. The entire park was understaffed. Nobody had done this. The second thing was the trail cam. We keep a couple cheap ones to track foot traffic on the lesser, used paths. One of them kept triggering in the dead of night, around 2 or 3 a.m., when the gates were locked. I pulled the card one morning and flipped through the photos while eating a stale granola bar. Most frames were just darkness or branches moving, but every so often there was a blur, pale long, human-shaped but not in any dramatic, paranormal way. Just wrong in the way a person looks when they move too fast through a long exposure. Except the shutter speed wasn't long. It was normal. I told myself it was probably a vagrant, maybe someone camping illegally in the deeper parts of the park. The budget cuts meant fewer patrols, fewer eyes. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the job, but the sense of being watched started to follow me. That's not unusual in the woods. You spend enough years alone under trees, and you get used to the feeling that eyes are on you. This was different. It felt targeted, like someone knew exactly who I used to be and exactly what I'd fallen down to. One afternoon I hiked out to an overgrown service trail to clear some blowdowns. It used to be one of my favorite spots when I first visited the park as a teenager. Now it looked abandoned. Ferns swallowed the old footpath. Fallen logs lay soft with rot. A chainsaw certification from this agency was still processing, so all I had was a handsaw that bent if I looked at it wrong. I spent an hour cutting through a single log that would have taken me 30 seconds with a proper saw. Sweat dripped into my eyes, and the forest around me stayed unnaturally quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing. I stood up to stretch my back and realized there were fresh footprints behind me, not boot prints, bare feet, adult-sized. The soil was dry enough that they shouldn't have been crisp, but they were. Every toe clear. They stopped about 10 feet behind me and didn't continue in any direction, just a line ending mid-trail, as if the person simply vanished. I told myself it was old, maybe a trick of the light, but the hairs on my arms wouldn't lie flat. I tried to work faster. Every time I looked up, I expected to see someone standing among the trees. No shape appeared, but the feeling didn't fade. By the time I finished, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone, even for a moment. The worst happened a week later. I was assigned opening duties, which meant unlocking the gates before sunrise. That far edge bathroom was on my list again. The logs still showed it being cleaned. Same handwriting, same signature that didn't match anyone on staff. I walked out there with my flashlight, the beam barely cutting through the morning fog. When I reached the building, the door was shut. I opened it slowly. Inside, the place looked freshly cleaned again. But this time on the counter by the sink, something waited. My old Sare patch. The exact one I thought I'd misplaced during my move. The fabric was worn, edges frayed from years of service. It shouldn't have been there. It shouldn't have been anywhere in this park. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. The cold inside the bathroom was worse than before, settling deep enough into my bones that it made my teeth ache. I picked up the patch. It was damp, like it had been left outside overnight. I realized then that nothing supernatural had to be happening for something to be terrifying. Someone was moving through the park at night. Someone with access to places they shouldn't be. Someone close enough to me to know what I'd lost, what I'd given up, what had been taken from me. Someone who wanted me to know they were watching. I reported it, of course. My supervisor wrote it down with the same dead expression he used for vandalism reports and broken light bulbs. He didn't send anyone to check the place. Didn't ask any questions. Didn't seem surprised. That told me everything. The danger wasn't the forest. It wasn't ghosts or myths or anything hiding in the dark. The real danger was working in a place where nobody cared enough to look twice at a threat. Where understaffing and budget cuts meant anything unexplained was simply ignored. I still go to work. I still clean the same bathrooms and hike the same neglected trails. But I'm not blind anymore. I know there's someone out there who moves through these woods with more freedom than any of us. Someone who doesn't want to be seen. Someone who knows my routines and my history. But I also know myself. I didn't spend a decade in federal service to be scared off by shadows. I've handled worse. I've walked into burning forests and carried people out of places that didn't want to let them go. Whatever is out here, whatever thinks it can watch me without being seen, I'm watching back now. My senses are sharper. My awareness is clearer. And I have years of experience surviving places that didn't care whether I lived or died. The fear hasn't gone away, but something steadier has taken root beside it. A reminder that I'm still the same person who earned every patch, every certification, every scar. The job might have changed, but I haven't. And whatever waits in these woods, it's going to learn that. I spent more than a decade in federal service. NPS, BLM, Forest Service. My whole adult life felt like it had been building toward one clean line, one path. Field ranger, boots on the ground. Fireline work. SAR operations that left me shaking with adrenaline after we pulled someone out alive. I loved that world. I loved feeling like what I did mattered. Like the land and the people who came to it meant something, and I was part of protecting that. I had a promotion lined up that would have finally moved me into the lead roles I'd been grinding toward for years. A dream location. 2. The kind of district a ranger might spend their whole career trying to get into. And then everything collapsed. One thing after another. My offer was pulled with barely an explanation. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and yanked the future straight out. Suddenly I had nothing. No job, no security. Nothing but a stack of certifications and skills that didn't seem to matter to anyone anymore. When I got hired by state parks, I told myself it was temporary. Just a landing spot. Something to keep my hands busy, keep my head above water. They told me I'd be doing meaningful work. Helping the public. Stewardship. All the buzzwords that usually mean something when the agency saying them isn't bleeding money. But the job was nothing like that. I went from leading rescues and running trainings to cleaning restrooms at trailheads that smelled like ammonia and sun-baked urine before I even unlocked the doors at sunrise. I went from falling trees on wildland fires as a FAL2 to begging someone in the office to sign my name on a chainsaw cert I had already earned 100 times over. Everything was understaffed. Everyone stretched thin. The whole place felt worn down. Even the rangers who had been there for years looked like they were waiting for something to crack. At first, I tried to ignore the tension. Just keep my head down, do what I was told. But the longer I stayed, the more I noticed the way people avoided certain parts of the park alone, especially early in the mornings or after closing. I wasn't supposed to ask questions, so I didn't. I just worked my shifts, did my tasks, tried not to think about how far I'd fallen. The first time something felt wrong, it was small. Just a strange sound out by the service road behind the maintenance shed. It was barely light out. A cold, blue morning in early spring when the air sits heavy and wet in your throat. I was unlocking the gate when I heard it. A scraping noise, like something dragging over gravel. Not fast, slow. A steady pull. I figured it was a deer or an elk moving weird, maybe injured. I walked toward it, expecting to see tracks or at least movement between the trees. But the sound stopped the second I rounded the corner. There was nothing there, no tire marks. No animal prints, no branches down. Just quiet woods, and the feeling that something had been watching me. I shrugged it off. A long career in the field conditions you to strange noises, and I'd heard plenty worse on night ops. But the next morning, the same thing happened. Same time. Same scraping sound. Same sudden quiet when I got close. I started checking the area every morning after that, even when I didn't hear anything, just to make sure nothing had been tampered with. Everything always looked untouched. I tried mentioning it casually to one of the senior rangers during a patrol, but she just said, "Probably wind," without looking up from her clipboard. There wasn't even enough wind to move the grass. I stopped bringing it up. Weeks passed. I kept working, cleaning fire pits, collecting trash bags so heavy they cut into my palms, scrubbing graffiti off restroom walls that reappeared in the same handwriting every 2 days. Every night I went home feeling smaller than when I'd woken up. I told myself it was just temporary, just a bad chapter. Then, early one morning before opening, I was sent to check the northern picnic area. It was still dark out, no sunrise yet, just that dull gray that makes everything look flatter, like the world hasn't fully loaded in. I parked near the trailhead and stepped out with my flashlight. The air felt wrong. Thick. Cold in a way that didn't match the season. There were footprints in the dirt along the edge of the pavement. Bare footprints. Not wide like a man's, but long. Too long. I crouched down, trying to see them clearly, but something about them made my stomach tighten. They weren't distorted like someone dragging their feet. They were placed carefully, one after the other, heading straight toward the tree line. I followed them with my light. They went maybe 30 feet and then stopped abruptly, like whoever made them had just vanished. No turnaround, no sprint marks, no scatter of leaves, just an end, the hairs on my neck lifted. I backed up, slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, no birds, no insects. The silence felt heavy enough to press against my ears. I told myself it was nothing. Some kid messing around. But kids don't walk barefoot in the dark through thorns and needles. And no joke leaves footprints that simply stop. Over the next week, things escalated. I started finding tools moved from where I'd left them. Gas cans shifted to the opposite side of the shed. My radio turned off when I knew I'd left it on. Small things at first, easy to explain away. But then there were noises on patrol. Heavy footsteps keeping pace with me, but always just out of sight, following along the tree line. I'd stop walking, and the footsteps would stop too. Dead silent. I'd start again, and they'd continue. It got to the point where every shift felt like being watched by someone just smart enough not to be seen. One night, after closing, I had to lock up the main gate. The air was cold enough to sting my fingers as I worked the chain through the loops. When I stepped back toward the truck, I heard breathing behind me. Not close, but not far either. Slow, steady, deliberate. I turned, my flashlight beam hit nothing but open road and dark trees. But the breathing didn't stop. It only faded once I got into the truck and shut the door. I drove home gripping the wheel until my knuckles hurt. That night, lying in bed, I realized something important. Something I'd been avoiding. The fear crushing my chest wasn't about what was happening in the park. It was about what had already happened to me. Everything I had built, my career, my purpose, my pride, had been stripped away, and I had been walking around half alive ever since. That park, with its silence and strange shadows, wasn't destroying me. It was reflecting me. Every inch of it was a reminder of what I'd lost and how vulnerable I felt now. The next morning, I went into work early. I walked the grounds as the sun rose, passing every place where I'd felt something watching me. And for the first time, nothing followed. No footsteps. No dragging. No breathing. Just wind moving softly through the branches and birds waking up. I realized then that the park hadn't changed. I had. I'd let my loss hollow me out until every crack felt like danger. Every sound felt like a threat. It didn't make the job any less exhausting or the situation any less unfair, but it made something clear. I wasn't done. I had survived fire seasons that burned entire valleys. Nights where the only thing keeping me moving was the thought of someone out there waiting for rescue. Years of work that demanded everything from me. And I was still here, I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life ghosting through bathrooms and trailheads feeling like I was already dead. So I made a decision. I'm using this job for what it is, a stop, not a destination. I'm rebuilding, one step at a time. Getting my certs back in order, reaching out to old contacts, applying pressure where I can. The land still matters, and so do the people who protect it. That part of me never disappeared. The park feels different now. Still quiet, still heavy in places, but no longer hostile. Or maybe it's me who's no longer shrinking away from it. I don't know. But I do know this: whatever was scraping through the gravel, whatever walked barefoot between the trees, whatever breathed behind me in the dark, it hasn't returned since the morning I decided to stop letting fear make choices for me. Maybe it was never real. Maybe it was stress or exhaustion, or the weight of everything I'd lost pressing in until my mind created edges where there were none. Or maybe sometimes the world presses you to see what you're made of. Either way, I'm still here, and I'm moving forward again. I started noticing the change halfway through my second summer. The kind of shift you don't recognize all at once, but feel in your stomach first. Like something in the routine has been bent just slightly out of place. I'd worked enough parks by then to know that every one ran on a different rhythm. Some parks were quiet and slow. Some were loud and tourist heavy, some mixed maintenance with janitorial, and some tried to separate everything even when they didn't have the staff for it. I never minded the variety. Cleaning bathrooms wasn't glamorous, but work was work, and I'd always figured if I kept showing up and doing the jobs nobody wanted, I'd eventually get the chance to learn something else, maybe something that mattered more. That belief kept me going through the early mornings and bleach fumes. The park I was working in that season was one of those all-around ranger situations. You didn't have a fixed duty. You did whatever was needed. Some days I was clearing brush or hauling heavy equipment. Some days I was scrubbing sinks and toilets. It wasn't unusual, and honestly, after my first job in a county park, where I spent half my time scraping gum off picnic tables, nothing surprised me anymore. I'd gone from that to the National Forest Service as a rec tech, which was basically an upgrade in name only. I still cleaned bathrooms. I still mopped wet concrete floors. I still dealt with tourists who acted like a muddy trail was a personal insult. But in this park, things felt heavier. The air always smelled faintly metallic, especially in the mornings before the sun warmed the pine needles. The maintenance shed was old, built in the 70s, and the lights flickered in a way that didn't seem electrical. More like something unseen was moving past them. I told myself it was just age, just the way old tubes hum and shake. But even the older staff kept their breaks outside the shed, like they didn't want to linger inside. The bathrooms were set far apart from each other, because the park layout followed an old trail system. One was near the campgrounds, one near the lake, one deep in the day-use area where nobody went after dusk except staff. That day-use bathroom was the one everyone disliked. It wasn't haunted or anything stupid like that. It was just isolated. The trees pressed in tight around it, and the walkway stayed damp even on dry days. Animals dug around there often, so you'd hear rustling even when it was empty. I always tried to clean it early, when there was still enough light to make the place feel normal. One afternoon, after a long shift dealing with a clogged RV dump station, my supervisor told me the day-use bathroom still needed to be checked. It was late, only an hour before closing, but if I didn't do it, someone would complain the next morning. I hated leaving tasks for other people, so I grabbed the keys, the bag, and the cleaning cart and drove down. When I got out of the truck, I noticed how quiet the woods were. No wind, no birds, not even squirrels. The sun was low enough that the shadows from the trees stretched long and thin across the walkway. I tried not to think about it. I unlocked the door, propped it open with a rock like always, and pushed the cart inside. I always started with the sinks, You could clean them fast, and they gave you a sense of progress. But about 10 minutes in, I heard a sound outside, just a soft scrape on the concrete, like something being dragged. I froze because it didn't sound like an animal. It was too slow, too steady. After a moment I stepped outside, expecting to see a branch that had fallen, or maybe a raccoon dragging a trash bag. But the walkway was empty. The trees were still motionless. Even the air felt still, like everything around me was holding its breath. I went back inside, trying to ignore the feeling settling into my spine. I'd been alone in parks before. I'd worked in worse conditions. This was nothing new. But the sound came again, only this time from behind the bathroom, like someone brushing against the outer wall. Not fast, not panicked, methodical. I stepped out again, walked around the building slowly, each footstep loud on the damp concrete. Nothing, just the same stillness, the same coldness in the air that didn't match the season. When I came back around to the front, the cleaning cart had moved. Not far, maybe a foot. But the wheels had been locked. I always locked them because the floor in that bathroom was uneven, and the cart would roll on its own if I didn't. I stood there staring at it, feeling ridiculous for being scared. Maybe I forgot. Maybe it shifted on its own. Maybe the floor wasn't as level as I thought. I told myself anything that made logical sense, because the alternative was admitting I didn't understand what was happening. I finished fast after that. I wiped mirrors that didn't need wiping and checked stalls twice just to confirm they were empty. I was rolling the cart out when I heard the third sound. This one from inside the trees, farther off but clearer. A heavy thud, like a footfall, but too spaced out and too heavy to be human. The kind of step you feel in your chest. I didn't go toward it. I didn't check. I just locked the bathroom, loaded the cart, and drove away, watching the trees in my mirrors until the road curved. For a while I tried to shake it off. I told myself parks are weird places. The woods play tricks on you. Animals wander close to structures. Acoustics change as the temperature drops. It could have been anything. But then smaller things started happening on other shifts. Tools left in one spot showed up across the shed. Radios turned on without anyone touching them. A large metal ladder fell in the middle of the night, even though it had been secured with 2 straps. All explainable, technically, but never fully. I never talked to anyone about it. Nobody wants to be the new seasonal worker complaining about feelings or strange noises. I just kept working. I kept telling myself I was there to build skills, to move up like I had in my other jobs. And honestly, the rest of the work wasn't bad. I even started shadowing some of the interp staff to learn more, and that gave me something else to focus on. But I never went back to the day-used bathroom alone again. I traded shifts, came early, found excuses, anything. I didn't care if it made me look lazy. Every instinct told me not to stand in that building by myself again. Near the end of the season, a crew came to renovate some of the structures, including that bathroom. When they pulled up the old concrete walkway, they found a long, narrow trench underneath, maybe from old drainage work nobody remembered. It had partially collapsed, leaving hollow pockets right beneath where people walked. The lead workers said it was surprising the whole walkway hadn't caved in already. That explained the sounds. The scraping, the dragging, the heavy thuds. They were the ground shifting under a structure that shouldn't have been standing anymore. It explained the vibration I felt. It explained why everything moved slightly. It explained everything in a way that didn't involve anything supernatural. But what it didn't explain was the part that stayed with me most. The sense, in that moment, that someone else was there, just out of sight, watching me the whole time. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe my mind filling in the blanks of things I didn't understand. The logical explanation was enough to settle the fear, but it never erased it. And, even now, years later, after moving on to better jobs, better duties, and finally a permanent position where I barely touch maintenance anymore, I still think about that place sometimes. Not in a dramatic way, not like it haunts me. Just a quiet memory of how close I'd been to something going wrong without even knowing it. A reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. They're the real dangers sitting right under your feet, waiting, silent, unnoticed, until the moment they decide to show themselves. I started the job thinking it would be simple. Seasonal work at a state park sounded peaceful, maybe even easy. I imagined long, quiet mornings, sweeping trails, checking signs, helping visitors, maybe learning something about how parks were run. When the supervisor handed me my schedule the first day, I thought nothing of it. Only later did I realize how much they left out. No one explained that seasonal was just a polite word for bottom of the ladder. No one explained that I'd be doing whatever the full-timers didn't want to do, and that the tasks written on paper were only half the truth. My shift slid across the clock like spilled water. Some days I opened, other days I stayed until nearly midnight. The late nights were the worst. The park felt different after dark. Everything that looked peaceful in the sun turned cold and hollow under the floodlights. The picnic areas looked abandoned. The trees gathered into black groups that watched me, and the bathrooms echoed like caves. Cleaning those bathrooms became part of my routine, even though I wasn't told about that during the interview. No one warned me that the smell could cling to my clothes until morning, or that I'd be scrubbing tiles while the rest of the staff sat in the office, pretending not to notice I was still out there. The repetition got under my skin. Every night felt the same. Empty parking lots, silent trails, my radio crackling with static. The same tasks over and over: wipe, sweep, mop, restock, repeat. I didn't feel like I was learning anything except how long I could stay awake without losing my balance. Still, I kept going. I needed the money, and I told myself it was temporary. One night, late in the season, I was assigned to close the north end of the park alone. Usually at least 2 people handled closing, but everyone else had left early for some staff gathering I hadn't been invited to. The supervisor handed me the keys and a flashlight and told me to lock everything and call it a night. His voice was already halfway out the door. The air felt heavy that night, thick with the last breath of summer. The park was dead quiet. Not even the small animals were moving. I walked down the paved path toward the older restrooms near the boat rental area. They were the ones everyone avoided. The lights inside flickered sometimes, the drains made odd sucking noises, and the air always felt damp no matter how hot the day had been. When I reached them, the doorway was wide open, even though I had passed by earlier and closed it. I stood there for a moment trying to decide if I had messed up, or if someone had come through afterward. My shift logs would be checked, so I had to take responsibility either way. I stepped inside, trying to ignore how the smell had somehow gotten worse. The lights buzzed overhead, dim and uneven. I wiped down the counters and mirrors first, wanting to get out as soon as possible. The drains in the floor made a slow clicking sound, like something cooling down after being overheated. I tried not to think about it. I kept moving, working quickly but not so fast that anyone could call it sloppy. When I finished the men's side, I stepped out to secure the storage closet. The padlock hung open even though I hadn't touched it that night. I froze. I knew I hadn't left it like that. Another staff member might have come by earlier, but no one had said anything, and usually the place was untouched after dark. I reached out and closed the lock, pretending it didn't bother me, pretending it didn't feel like someone had been watching me do a job no one else wanted to do. The final thing on my checklist was the trash run. The cans were scattered from the parking area all the way down to the small fishing dock. I grabbed the cart and started emptying them one by one, dragging heavy bags behind me. The wind began picking up, making the trees hiss. The water at the lake slapped softly against the shore. The whole place felt like it was shrinking around me. By the time I reached the dock, I noticed something out of place. A single life jacket lay in the middle of the walkway. They were usually kept tied together in stacks near the shed. This one looked soaked and heavy, like it had been pulled straight from the water. I bent down to pick it up, but when I lifted it, something dripped from the straps. The smell hit me before the sound. It wasn't lake water. It was thick, metallic, and sharp. My stomach twisted. I dropped it back onto the boards. There had been no rentals that day. The boats hadn't moved. I checked that area myself when I started my shift. Everything had been clean then. I backed away slowly and marked it in my mental log, deciding I would report it to the supervisor first thing in the morning. There was nothing else I could do at that moment. When I finally finished dumping the last bag, the sky had gone darker than usual. The lights along the path flickered in sets, buzzing like something inside them was burning out. My radio crackled again but didn't form any words. I kept walking, pushing the cart back up the hill toward the main gate. My arms were shaking from exhaustion and something else I didn't want to name. At the top of the path, near the maintenance shed, I stopped. The door was open again. I knew with absolute certainty I had locked it. It wasn't like the storage closet. This one had a deadbolt. My whole body tensed. I stared at the darkness inside and told myself there was nothing in there that could hurt me. It was just tools and shelves and cleaning supplies. Nothing more than that. I walked up to it, closed the door, and locked it again. My hands were sweating so much I almost dropped the keys. I didn't look over my shoulder, even though every part of me wanted to. I walked straight to the gate, locked it, turned off the final row of lights, and got in my car. When I drove out onto the main road, I didn't look back at the park. I didn't want to see anything behind me. The next morning, I turned in my keys. I didn't explain anything. I didn't blame anyone for not telling me what seasonal work really meant. Maybe they thought I already knew, or maybe they just didn't care. Either way, I learned something real. I learned that long nights, endless repetitive work, and empty places with too many shadows weren't for me. The park taught me that quietly and slowly, in a way that left no doubt in my mind. I never went back. Not even as a visitor.